Hey everyone, it's Joe Waxman, and I'm here making another video. I want to talk about food this morning where I'm at, and yeah, so all right, let's begin. Basically, my background is in food. I grew up with a strong foundation in food. My parents studied macrobiotics. My father started the first health food store in Philadelphia. Still there today. He doesn't own it anymore, but he teaches and counsels about food, macrobiotics, health. So I grew up learning all about food, basically, and its effects on the body. And this is something that I think a lot of people are not very aware of. I mean, so let's start from the beginning. Basically, food, I mean, most of you know to some extent that food affects our health, but what we're unaware of is how much it affects our health. We're told that, health is, by chance and genetics, and if we get cancer, that's probably genetics and so forth. But it's much more about our diet and the things we put into our body than anything else. Yeah, there are other factors, environmental factors and whatnot. Maybe we're being poisoned by, EMF radiation or some other type of radiation or environmental chemicals and that sort of thing. But most of the time, the cancers, the diseases that we get are caused by our food. But it could be anything we put into our body. It could be things that we smoke, like cigarettes or other things. Injections are a big thing. I mean, a lot of people are becoming aware now that the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, has basically been using people as test subjects for years, not only as test subjects, but as sort of cash cows to, purposely making people sick so that they spend more on, doctors, medicine, pharmaceutical industry. That's a real thing. These are not good people, really, a lot of them. They just want more money, want more power, more control, and all that. But that's a whole nother subject. That's not really the point of this. But that basically, bottom line, food affects health. And the modern diet, especially in the West, especially in America, is not healthy at all. Standard American diet, it's full of chemicals, full of processed sugars, fats, devoid of proper nutrition. It's done on purpose to make people fat, sick, lazy, lower IQ. IQs keep dropping year over year. All that's intentional. It's not just chance or mistake or, willful ignorance. I mean, not even willful, unwillful ignorance. It's intentional, right? So food affects us physically. So some people are starting to be aware of that. What people generally don't know is that food affects us mentally. We draw this huge distinction between drugs and non-drugs. And we think, oh, things like drugs, what the class we call drugs, these are the things that have an effect on our mind, right? Like alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, or even prescription drugs. These are the things that I'm a little blurry. I'm just camera focus. These are the things that affect our mind, but all food affects our mind. All food affects our thinking. It's just more subtle and long term, drawn out. That's what most people don't realize. And whatever affects our thoughts also affects our emotions and also affects our spirituality. Really, so food, in essence, and by food I mean not just physical food, but everything we eat, drink, breathe, or put into our body in one way or another is going to have this effect on our thinking, right? So I can't remember how much I've said in the past, but I'll just have to, if I've said any of this before in passing, I'll just have to repeat myself. Anyway, so food affects our thinking very much. So and we can observe this in different ways, right? Like think about a meat, like a carnivore versus a vegan, even in humans, like never mind the animals. I mean, it's obvious in animals, like lions versus deer or, antelope or zebras or cows or whatever. right? Wolves, right? Uh, other birds of prey, or we can see this obviously in animals. There's a major difference between carnivores and herbivores, but even in humans, right? Vegans, we come up with this derogatory term soy boy, which I kind of resent because soy is not feminizing. I mean, that's a propaganda thing. It has phytoestrogens, and I just want to, since I mentioned soy, I just have to go off on. I have to say this. Um, Actually, real estrogens are found in abundance in all animal foods, especially factory farmed animal foods, in potencies that are, thousands of times greater than, even tens of thousands of times greater than anything you'd find in soy, which actually is not feminizing. So it's a wrong term. It's not only derogatory and offensive to soy, which is a traditional food. They've ruined it by making it GMO, right? But it's traditionally been used in Asia for tens of thousands of years by millions and even billions of people in all forms, fermented and non-fermented. And it does not produce man boobs. And it does not make men into women. Just go fight a kung fu or karate master. You know what I mean? Like it's totally a false term, soy boy, right? Completely false. But modern commercially farmed animal food has, because of the growth hormones, these are synthetic estrogens that are thousands of times more potent, and they do create man boobs. These are feminizing. These are turning men into women. I mean that, like, this straight up fact. You can research that. I've researched that. So anyway, soy boy is wrong, just so you know. And there's nothing wrong with soy. It actually fights against cancer and does not produce man boobs in any way, shape, or form. I can take anyone to task on that point. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So we know that food affects us. We know it intuitively, instinctively, right? That's why people who are attached to meat are just so attached to it. It's not the nutrition, obviously. It's not merely the taste. They're attached to the whole energetic, vibrational effect that it gives, which is, it's a certain kind of strength and aggressiveness. Heavy, meat can create a very heavy mentality, heavy thinking, but strong and aggressive and grounded and solid, right? And I'm specifically talking about beef, right? Each food will create a different effect, right? Pork creates a greediness, a gluttony. It's very fatty, and people that eat a lot of pork, they become very fat, big fat heads, and they start to look like pigs. And their mentalities becomes very greedy, very clever, and very greedy, always wanting to take, because pigs are non-discriminatory. That's the thing why there's food laws in Judaism, in Islam, and in Hindu, right? 3 main religions that have food laws, and what they all reject is pork, pigs, because pigs are non-discriminatory. People know that you can feed a pig's human meat and they'll eat it. They'll eat anything. That means pigs do not discriminate. What's the meaning of that? What's the importance of that? Well, number one, they're eating animal food, pigs, meaning that they're not herbivores. So you're eating an animal that's eating animal food. That's 2 animals. Like, if you feed a pig animal food, then you eat it. It's like double animal food. That therefore it creates a super predator, right? We generally eat herbivore animals like cows, especially mammals, right? When we get lower, it's different. Like fish will cannibalize each other, but that's different because they're very low consciousness. And then chickens will eat bugs, again different because they're more primitive. But in mammals, the food laws with the religions, they say like only eat herbivorous animals. So they say like only eat cloven animals, which means herbivorous animals, cows, goats, sheep, things like that, right? As far as mammals go. The reason for that, well, not only the cleanliness, it's just that pigs are non-discriminatory, and we want to be discriminatory. We don't want to just eat everything, right? Because that's like, right, in China, what do they eat? Well, we know they eat everything. We know that they eat, cows, chickens, fish, but also pigs, a lot of pork. They eat a lot of pork. They'll eat cats and dogs, and they'll also eat whales and dolphins. And in the West, we morally object to that, right? Especially the cats and dogs and whales and dolphins for whatever, it's cultural, but it's also, there's some intuition about that, that number one, cats and dogs are mammals that are carnivores, right? So we don't eat carnivorous animals, right? We don't eat lions, and we don't eat animals that are close to us. We don't eat monkeys like primitive tribes do. But modern people, we find that offensive. Eating a silverback gorilla or a chimpanzee, right? That's morally offensive. In the same way that eating each other is taboo. Now Satanists do it, and there's a resurgence of that because of the Satanism that has come out. But that's taboo. We don't eat each other. We don't eat humans. Humans, that's morally reprehensible, right? But energetically, there's also a backup for that. That we want to eat further away from us. That's why almost nobody objects to eating fish, right? Especially small fish like game fish, like herring or sardines or anchovies or things like that, smelts, right? That's the least, or like eggs or dairy, right? There's no religions that prohibit that, as far as I know, unless we're talking about monasteries, which I'll get to. But yeah, so the reason behind pork is not only the uncleanliness, but because it creates this non-discriminatory mindset where we just take everything without drawing any without any boundaries. We're just taking everything. Eat, right? Cow is discriminatory, right? Cow will eat grass, but they will not eat meat. They will not eat animals. They'll eat bugs. So actually, like the whole thing with vegans, all the urbans, there are no vegan animals. I hate to break it to you. I know I'm just like going on different tangents because I'm somewhere in the middle, right? I'm in the middle, right? Vegans are just as nuts as, like pork eaters, right? There are no vegan animals because all animals eat bugs. They eat 5% of their diet in bugs. So every argument that says, well, where do they get their protein? They're 100% vegan. No, they're not. They're not 100% vegan. 5% animal food is actually a good amount of animal food to include in your diet if you don't want to include a lot of animal food. 5% is good. So they're eating 5% bugs. Anyway, another tangent. But we know the difference between carnivores and herbivores, right? Herbivore is soft and gentle and timid and spiritual and weak and, thin and, might be more prone to nutritional deficiency, right? And once again, I'm not a vegan, right? I don't eat much animal food. I pretty much eat around 5%, maybe a little more sometimes, maybe even a little less sometimes, but around 5% animal food. Anyway, meat eaters, heavy, young, young is a concept that most of you are probably vaguely familiar with. Anyway, like strong, bigger, more likely to gain weight, gain excess. Meat eaters suffer diseases of excess like cancer and diabetes, right? And, stroke. Well, vegans can suffer stroke too, right? For different reasons. But anyway, meat eaters can also suffer from stroke, obviously, heart attacks. But, big, strong, aggressive, wants to fight you, right? Materialistic, right? So we know that instinctively, intuitively, that food is affecting us mentally and emotionally beyond the physical, right? It's also, and because of that, it's also can potentially limit our spirituality, right? There's no food that's going to make you more spiritual, but there is food that will inhibit spiritual growth, like too much meat. And they always say that in spiritual traditions. Be careful of meat. Don't eat meat, or don't eat much meat, right? Because it's too heavy, too grounded, too materialistic. And that's the thing. If you eat a lot of meat, you're not going to be able to think high-minded. You're going to be very grounded in your mentality, and you're going to be thinking about survival and materialism. Building a nice big house, having a nice big body, having enough money, having enough food. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it's going to limit, if you eat too much meat, it's going to limit your ability to think big and have more philosophical, spiritual thoughts. I know some people are like, bullshit, I know it's meat eater, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there's a reason all spiritual traditions say this. I mean, it's not just me pulling this out of nowhere. And so I mentioned monasteries. Most monasteries in the East are vegetarian or vegan, pretty much, for that reason. Now, there's a difference between vegan monasteries and veganism in modern culture because, for many reasons, I mean, the lifestyle is 100% regimented. In a monastery, it's not easy living. They do not have any free time or very little free time. They spend a ton of time meditating, and all their other time is doing tasks. And the reason for that is because they don't want idle time for the mind to wander, right? So it's a very structured, rigid lifestyle that allows them to benefit from veganism. And I don't recommend veganism for most people. It's actually not veganism because I don't think they think that they're better than everyone else, and I don't think that they think everyone else should do what they do. They just don't eat animal food. Veganism is that thing that says it's better for everyone not to eat any animal food at all, which is it's basically a cultish, childish philosophy. So they're not. So I want to rephrase that. No, they're not vegans. They just don't eat animal food, and they have a very rigid. And I don't think there's not a single vegan that I've ever met who lives anywhere near that lifestyle. They're out, living like normal dope idiots, doing whatever, preaching that everyone should give up all animal food because they're better than everyone else because they don't eat any animal food. Anyway. Yeah, it's totally different in monasteries, but they do that for spiritual practice, for spirituality, for spiritual growth. Every waking moment is dedicated to spiritual. They're waking up at 3 a.m. They're meditating hours and hours a day. They're cooking, they're cleaning, they're not having any free time. They're not socializing. They're not having sex with each other. They're celibate, right? They're engaged in spirituality 100% of their time, right? And yeah, they have not a vegan, animal diet that is devoid of animal food for that purpose. And for that purpose, it serves them, right? So, and if you eat meat, it's creating this very heavy, dense, aggressive, materialistic mindset. They can't think big, right? That's very real. Right, and every different food is going to have a different effect on us. Not only that, it affects the way we look. Like it's very obvious when people eat a lot of chicken, they start to look like chicken. They act like chicken. You can hear them laughing. They laugh like chickens. They talk like chickens. They move like chickens. Their face, they develop it. Like they develop this big, puffy, loose neck with all the spots. And their nose grows kind of like beakish. They start to look like chickens. Like I pointed out, people eat a lot of eggs. Their eyes pop out. They become very intense. You can see it sometimes in Asia where people, not so much in the West, but sorry, just refocusing the camera. People eat a lot of fish, and they just have this like bubbly eye, like. I can't obviously do it. I don't eat enough fish, but they look like goldfish, basically. It's different than the egg look. The egg look is more intense, and the fish look is just like this bubbly, like. And then like in Japan, you can see it like with they developed this crease here from fish because the fish have the gills and they develop like that. Sometimes you see it in Japan. Too much fish. Meat is very like the very heavy, intense face. It's often drawn out here, or like fatty and loose. Anyway, again, in the pig is just like big fat head, no neck, right? Nose like this. Food affects the way we look, is my point. And if you become adept at looking at people's faces, looking for food, you can see what they're eating. That's very real. I was trained in that since a kid. Believe it or not, we'd go to class and people would stand up in front and we'd say, well, what did they eat? What did they eat? I grew up with that. in macrobiotics, we do facial diagnosis. And this is an ancient tradition, both in the East and the West. The West had it too, but it's became more popular in the East, and that's where, you know, we learned it from Japanese macrobiotic teachers. So yeah, food is very, very powerful, much more powerful than we really give credit for, and especially in the West. In the East, they know much more about it with TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and traditional Japanese, traditional Asian medicine. They know a lot about that. Ayurveda in India, these different food traditions, they know a lot about, you know, how food affects us on much, much deeper level than we realize here in the West, right? So it's affecting us mentally, it's affecting us emotionally, because whatever we think, that's what we feel, right? I don't know if you noticed, but first comes the thought, then comes the emotions. You don't have emotions without thoughts, very rarely. It's subtle. If you watch yourself, you'll see. First becomes a believed thought, then the emotion, right? Like, here's just a thought experiment. You see a snake, all of a sudden you get scared. It's a snake, oh my God. Then you look closer and you look, oh, it's just a rope. Well, what's the difference? It was the same thing all along, but you thought one thing originally, then you thought another. And the original thought produced emotion. So emotions come after thoughts. Emotions come from believed thoughts. So anything that changes our thoughts changes our emotions, right? And food changes our thoughts. So food changes our emotions, and food affects us spiritually by either inhibiting our spiritual growth or not inhibiting, right? And that's the thing. That's why meat most often is, and the problem is that, you know, when people go off meat, then they're much more likely to develop nutritional deficiencies because they don't know how to eat. I mean, I lived my whole life without meat, some fish, and then originally it was only, like as a kid, it was just fish, you know, like once a week or something like that, right? No other animal food. Then as I got older, I, you know, included some eggs, some dairy, but very little animal food most of my life. I mean, I know how to gain enough nutrition and strength without eating much animal food, without meat, without, you know, chicken, or pork, or anything like that. That's something that most people don't know. So when people go off meat, when they become vegetarian or vegan, then they become nutritionally deficient most of the time because they don't know how to eat. So that's the problem. So there's a problem with meat, right? That is too heavy and you know, can limit your mind and makes a very contracted, small mind, right? You know, like if I'm like this, am I gonna really be thinking spiritually? Am I gonna be thinking about God? No. I mean, it's too small. You can't have it all ways, right? If I want to be thinking about spirituality, God, I have to be much more open and expanded, right? And that's why the Eastern traditions, especially that are seeking spirituality, don't eat animal food or very little, right? In Hindu, they have 30% vegetarians, the highest concentration in the whole world, 30%. They eat some dairy, right? And that's it. It's because they're trying to become more spiritual. And they are. India has one of the most spiritual cultures in the world. Right? Okay. So not only what we eat, but how we eat affects us. So like food habits, you know, like it's important to have, if you want like good health, you need good food habits. I'm not going to go elaborate too much into that, but you know, sit down to eat, chew your food, eat properly cooked food, eat good quality food. All that's going to affect our mentality, right? People eat a lot of junk. You can see it in modern lifestyle. You can see who the people who are eating junk versus who are eating, you know, home cooked food. The people who are eating junk have like junky minds. You can hear it in the music. You can see it in the art. You can see it in the culture, right? It feels like junk food. It feels like McDonald's and Coca-Cola and pizza and, you know, just fast food and just junk, like heavily processed everything. Listen to music. You think that people are eating like traditional home cooked meals, you know, with the modern music, it's not limited to any one genre. It's not like only this or that. It's all genres. I mean, well, certain genres lend themselves more to home cooked food, but it's now across the barrier. More electronic music, more like, heavily produced music, obviously radio music. All these things are basically an outcome of the modern Western diet. You can hear it. It's just the music becomes heavily processed. The art becomes heavily processed. The culture becomes heavily processed, chemicalized, over too much sugar, too much fat, too much processing. But because that's influencing the mind, and then people go nuts. They go crazy because they lose their connection to nature, which our connection to nature is where we gain our health. Health comes from nature. You separate from nature, you lose balance, you lose health, right? So people go crazy. So yeah, so the how and the quality are extremely important for our thinking, right? If we're eating dirty food, we're gonna have dirty thoughts. We're gonna have dirty mind, dirty emotions. And if we let that go on, we'll act according to those thoughts and emotions. We'll have a dirty life. So, I mean, there's just so many examples of that. I don't want to go too far into it because otherwise this video will be too long. But I mean, you can just get an idea. Just look at modern culture. You can see all kinds of degenerative behavior, right? And that's coming from their diet a lot of times, by a large degree. A lot of food has a huge influence on people's behaviors, what they do, what they think, how they act, what they say, and all that. The next point I want to talk about with food is food limits. So it seems like, when we eat a food, we gain, because it's influencing our mind or influencing our thinking, we gain a certain way of thinking. But if we overdo it, then it has a negative result. Like, let's say, let's say a person grew up eating meat, and they eat meat every day, and then finally they reach a point in their life where they're just they're so saturated with meat that it's almost like they graduated from meat. Like they went through meat school and they finally graduate. Okay, finally, I've had enough meat. I've meated out to my, to the nth degree, and I can think in terms of meat. I can act in terms of meat. My body's full of meat. Everything's meat. And throughout, that person will automatically start rejecting meat. They'll know it through and through. You don't have to convince them. You see this. Sorry, picking my finger. Speaking of meat, need some meat. Oh, I'm just kidding. I cut my finger, cut my nails, and it was bugging me. Loose piece of skin. Ironically, I'm eating meat. Skin is meat. So that's a food limit. That person doesn't want to eat meat anymore because they've reached a limit of meat. Everyone has this in certain areas. Like you do something too much. It happens with food where we will reach our limit of a certain food because we've eaten enough, and it's almost like a soul lesson, right? We learn it from our soul. We learn experiences through food because it's influencing our thoughts, it's influencing our emotions, and therefore it's attracting certain situations into our life, right? Because energetically things vibrate with each other and resonate, and that's how we attract different situations. We eat a certain food, it's going to play out in our whole life, right? There's a unity in life that really goes beyond the basic sort of, disconnection. Everything's disconnected, that we think everything's disconnected and when we're very unevolved. When we're low level of thinking, we think everything's disconnected, nothing's related, nothing's connected. There's no God, there's no order to the universe. When we start to mature spiritually, we see how everything is related and connected, and our whole life is a reflection of who we are, right? That's why different people attract different things to themselves. And it's all, and so from a soul perspective, we eat foods to gain different experiences. So like when a person has gained enough meat experience, as an example, they will just be like, I don't want to eat more meat. I don't want to eat any more meat because I've had enough. I've done this my whole life. I don't want to eat. You see this. I mean, you see it like you just periodically you'll see somebody just like, I don't eat meat anymore. I used to eat a lot of meat. I don't eat it anymore. Or sometimes they'll do it for a period. They'll take a break because they just, it could be a time frame. It doesn't necessarily have to be you've eaten all the meat you need for the rest of your life. Although that does happen. Some people just do it for a period, right? And it's like, I've eaten enough meat. They take a few years off and they're like, oh, I need meat again. Or sugar, right? Some people are just eating so much sugar that they just can't eat anymore. They've eaten their lifetime's supply. And so they have to stop eating sugar or else they get in trouble. And the way this plays out sometimes, it's not even not like directly, like sometimes it'll take somebody getting sick, like the diabetic, right? Diabetic, gets fat, diabetes, they've eaten too much sugar. They can't eat sugar anymore, right? Now I think diabetics need to control their blood sugar, but it's basically like that. Like, yeah, they've eaten too much sugar and they shouldn't be eating sugar anymore. Or dairy. Some people have done it with dairy and they become lactose intolerant. Well, lactose intolerant, I guess, can come from not having the digestive enzymes, but some people then they develop cancer from excessive dairy consumption and other things, right? But basically, they get sick, and some people die because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to eat, but different foods will contribute to those diseases that they need to. You get a disease means you need to change. Often people don't even look at that because they're not told to, but the diet is the cause in many cases. So what I'm pointing to is that there is a limitation. There's the food limits to what we can eat in this lifetime, depending on our bodies and our soul requirements. People need different things, and they know that. What else? So like in my own experience, like I used to smoke cigarettes. I can't smoke cigarettes anymore. Not that cigarettes are healthy or I condone them, but there came a point where I was just like really hurting my teeth, and it was flaring up my sciatica, right? And so I had to stop smoking, not just because I thought it was a good idea, but because my body required it. And I can't smoke cigarettes anymore because I smoked enough, right? I mean, most people will be like, well, that's a great thing. Yeah, it is a great thing. Like, but I'm just making an example, right? The other thing is like alcohol. Like I can't really drink anymore. Not that I should be drinking at all in the first place, but well, I guess it served its purpose, but it doesn't make me feel good anymore. For whatever reason, I've had enough. I've reached my limit of alcohol. It's different for everyone. I'm not judging. It's not like I'm making a moral judgment about who should be drinking and who shouldn't. That's individual. Right? But like, other things. If somebody like grew up eating like just a broad junk food, like standard American diet, everything's pre-packaged, and like they might reach a point where there's like they either get sick and die because they don't recognize that food is the cause, that they've overeaten their lifetime supply of junk food, or they do realize it and they become a health nut. They're like, I've eaten junk food my whole life, and I got sick, and then I found health food, and I got cured, and now I'm just a health food nut. Well, they need to be a health food nut, not to the level of mental illness, right? But because they've overeaten their lifetime supply of junk food. Or somebody grew up in a traditional household in poverty, and they've eaten like very simple homemade cooked food their whole life. Well, they have a much bigger tolerance for eating out at restaurants, a little more processed food, a little more sugar, a little more animal food than other people because of the way they grew up and the experiences that they need to now learn from food that they didn't have when they were growing up. So my point is that there's food limitations, and that we should strive to seek out different, eat a varied diet where we're not just overeating one particular type of food because it might make us sick at some point. We might have had enough. We might need to change our way of eating because we require different experiences as time goes on. We mature, we graduate because we're ultimately, hosting a soul, the evolution of a soul. So we have to facilitate that growth of the soul, which means changing our diet and opening and being more varied and growing, evolving. The next thing about food is seasonality. It's important to take consideration where food grows and if it's seasonal where you live. There's a reason that different foods grow in different areas because they are adapted to that environment, right? I got the tropical beach going on in the background. I'm not actually at the beach, you probably know that. But tropical fruit in the summer is a very different thing from northern winter, like in Alaska or Canada or Northern Europe or Siberia or anywhere where it's like cold and freezing. Like you can't drink, like if you take, first of all, how's tropical fruit getting there? Well, it's being flown on a plane. That's not natural, right? It's getting there very quickly from very far away. But if you're eating bananas and papaya and mangoes in the freezing weather in the middle of winter in far north, that's way out of line. That's way out of energetic alignment, seasonality. And that will lead to an imbalance, right? Or like if you're in the tropical beach paradise and it's like 90 degrees, and then you're like cooking for like hunkering down in the winter in Alaska, right? Like, really hearty, well-seasoned, well-cooked root vegetable stew with like beans and protein, fish, and fish is wonderful, especially on the beach. But like you want lightly cooked stuff. You want summer food. That's not summer. That's winter food, like severe winter food. It doesn't fit, right? So you're not going to feel at home. I can be like, the beach. Get my hearty root vegetable stew. Like it's like for Alaskan winter, sitting at the beach trying to catch the sun. It's like schizophrenic. It's nuts. You feel so pressure from that. Like, what do you want at the beach? You want a nice cold drink, maybe tea. You want like a salad and like a light, I can't even remember the fish marinated with lime juice, ceviche, something like that, like a ceviche salad, or I don't know, just something light and refreshing and relaxing. That's my point. And some fruit and some, cold beverage and things like that. Like intuitively, we know that, right? So seasonality is important, and along with that, it's also like you got to take so many factors into consideration, like age, gender, what you do. The person who's doing hard physical labor needs a different diet than somebody who's just sitting in the classroom in front of the computer or just sitting on their butt all day, right? Very different, different activities require different food. The physical laborer is going to need more calories, more hearty food, more protein, versus the person who's sitting down all day needs, less calories, lighter food, more aerated type things, so they can maintain their energy and think better. Or a person who's driving all day, whatever you're doing, you need a different type of diet, right? Seasonality I mentioned, which seasonality is basically also has to do with location, far north, far south, near the equator, not near the equator, and all that, in the mountains, whatnot. Age, if you're healthy or sick, all these factors go into what you should eat. The next thing is yin and yang, which I want to do a video about yin and yang specifically. But yin and yang is basically archetypes. And I started studying yin and yang before I was age 10 because it was just common household terminology when I grew up. Everything was yin and yang, you know, so I understood it from a young age. So I'm like a native yin yang speaker. It's my native language, right? And it's invaluable in understanding basic simple archetypes, and it gave my foundation for astrology as well, because astrology is archetypal as well, right? All astrology is, you know, in astrology, in Western astrology, we have 12 signs, right? But other astrologies have 10 signs or 9 signs. There's 5 transformations in Oriental cosmology, which is a further extension of yin and yang. So yin and yang is essentially, we're not going to call it an astrology, but it is a dialectic thinking, and it's an archetypal basis for thinking in dialectics. There's the Hegelian dialectic, which is what, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I mean, that's a dialectic, right? And it's important to be able to think in terms of dialectics, to break everything down into simple terms. Like Einstein said, if you can't understand things simply, you don't really understand it, right? So yin and yang is a way to understand things simply, and it doesn't end there. Some people are so attached to yin and yang, they just try to apply it to everything and don't move on from yin and yang thinking, which is a mistake in my opinion. You need to be able to use it and then drop it and think in other ways, you know, flexibly, multifaceted. But yin and yang is very important, especially as it applies to food. Because once you understand yin food versus yang food and how it relates to you and your condition, then you can make wise choices as far as like becoming more balanced, right? And some people abuse it. If you're very egotistical and arrogant, which many people are when they first understand yin and yang, then they abuse it. And I know, because I did it plenty. You know, I was young and foolish and naive, and I had a very, superficial understanding of yin and yang, and I took advantage of it, and I hurt myself a lot. But you know, we live and learn, and you know, you learn and you grow and evolve, and you exhaust that arrogance. Anyway, so yin and yang is really important in understanding food. Yang is the contractive force, yin is the expansive force. And again, I remember when I was talking about meat versus, you know, carnivore versus veganism. Again, that's the yin and yang. You know, the carnivore would be more on the yang side, the vegan would be more on the yin side, expansive side. And it's important to understand that, because then you can bring the two together and find some balance in the middle, which is what we want, because that's where life is, that's where health is. That's where harmony and balance and peace is. And the last point I want to talk about with food is respect for food. And this is important because, you know, it goes back to the beginning when I said that food affects our thinking, which in turn affects our emotionality and can inhibit our spirituality. The subtle energetic quality of the food that we eat also reflects back in the subtle energetic quality that we carry around with us. So in other words, if you respect the food that you eat, that you're putting in your body, that's a form of self-respect. And too many people do not even respect the food that they're eating, which you can see. Like if you're watching, if you're paying attention, if you're really aware, they don't have any self-respect. They really don't. They're just eating like casually, throw away their food. They don't want it, like, or just like whatever. Like there's no respect, you know, like walking down the street and eating a hot dog and chewing with your mouth open, talking to your pal and like throw it, you know. You don't respect yourself if you're doing that, right? And if you don't have any self-respect, then that's just, it shows a very low vibrational quality of somebody who's just not very evolved, who's not capable of higher thinking or subtle, subtlety in life. There's no subtlety. It's crude and coarse and unrefined, and the lifestyle, the life that they're going to attract is going to be very coarse and basic and crude, right? You know, they're not going to reach any level of refinement. So I always say thank you to my food. I would say a little prayer before they eat. And like in, you know, you'll see in like religious, like in Christianity, they'll say grace, or they do in lots of religions, you know, that's really important. And to respect your food and to not waste your food. In Japan, there's a big culture, very strong cultural tradition of not wasting food, right? They have like, you know, dishes that they actually make with leftovers. And I think they do have this in plenty of places, especially because food is precious, food is life, you know, and anywhere where there's poverty, like you don't throw away leftovers, right? Because that's your food, that's your food, you know. Without food, people starve to death. You know, people starved to death for thousands of years. Like food was scarce, food was a commodity, food was rare. So in modern life, this modern times, we developed this excessive lifestyle where food is so readily available that we just toss it. We don't, oh, we eat it once, toss the rest. Who cares? Who cares? Don't respect your food. Just doesn't need respect. It's not me. It's whatever. Blah. Fuck food. You know, like that's all going. It's a part of you. That's if you say fuck food, then you're saying fuck me. Like fuck myself. Like fuck me. I don't give a shit about me. Fuck me. And I'm a doormat. Trample all over me. Spit on me. Use me. Like that's no self-respect. You do not respect food. You do not respect yourself. There's no division there. So the point I'm trying to say is really make an effort to respect your food. Say a little prayer before your food. That. Believe me, that is a form of, you could say, I don't want to say magic because that brings in the whole occultism thing, but the subtle energy that you're putting into your food, it's going to reflect back at you. It's not nothing. If you yell at your food before you eat it, you're going to take in that all that energy, all that yelling energy. And like Dr. Emoto's like writing words on water. I mean, that's real because it's subtle vibrational stuff that's going into the food or the water or whatever. So if you're saying a little prayer, little something very positive over your food, and you're eating that, you're praying for yourself. You're praying for your own benefit, your own self-respect, your own self-worth, and it's going to reflect over time. Especially, it's going to build up and create a very positive, energetic field around you. This is all very true, all very real. Respect your food. Don't waste it. So give this very positive energy towards your food. Okay, food is vitally important, vastly more important than we realize in our modern times, in modern days. I've known about this my whole life. I've observed it my whole life. It's 100% real. You would be so surprised about the things that I could point out with people. Like I can look at people and see what they're eating. Like, oh, too much chicken, too much eggs, too much meat, too much sugar, too much dairy, too much drugs, right? Too much alcohol, too much this, too much that. Not enough this, not enough that. No respect, you know. This person doesn't give a shit about their food. They throw it away carelessly. And they don't give a shit about themselves. So anyway, guys, start paying attention to these things. Food is very, very extremely influential in our whole being, in our whole makeup. We're not nearly as independent minded as we think we are. Like there's just so much going into our thoughts that are outside of external influences. We think like we are us, we're in control. We're not in control. You know, we're basically composed of everything but something we call us. That like, who am I? Who am I? Start asking, who am I? Well, we're everything else, everything in the world. We are everything in the world, except there's no essential thing called us. That's the truth behind it. So start becoming aware of these things. And you know, why are like you know, why are Italians and like Latin Americans so passionate? Well, look at our food. It's like full of garlic and spices and hot, you know, like passionate. Their food is passionate, right? You know? Same with like Chinese and Koreans, right? You ever watch a Korean drama? and then go to a Korean restaurant. You'll see it's the same thing, garlic and spices. Um, and then like look at like the boring diets like the Northern Europe. I mean, it's not boring to them, but it's what I mean. It's not nearly like the passion or the flavor, the spices. It's much more tame. Well, they don't have the same level of the spicy personalities and drama and you know as the spicy Southerners. You'll see this if you look at people's diets and you look at their culture, you'll see an exact reflection. It's one to one. Just start looking. It's everywhere. It's so obvious. It's so obvious when you start looking. That's really what it is, right? It's their diet. Hugely influential, and it's just like one of these things that people don't realize. That it's just like, when are you going to start waking up and looking at people's food? Okay, because that's really they're like one of the biggest missing links in our modern society in so many ways. All right, guys, this is my talk on food. I'm going to do more astrology soon because I've been feeling inspired to do that. So, yeah, I'll see you again soon. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.